If you like exciting stories with romance, drama and the spirit of the Wild West, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And now, let's plunge into one fateful meeting, which began with despair and loneliness, and led to the most unexpected ending. The dusty plain stretched like a scorched blanket stretched to the horizon. The sun, white-hot, hung at the zenith like a merciless god, and there was not a single cloud to block his hot gaze for a while. The air was trembling, and the road dust was swirling above the ground in transparent spirals, as if the earth itself was trying to relieve the heat. Even the tumbleweed was hiding somewhere on the sidelines, escaping from the scorching heat. Bare feet slapped faintly through the dead silence. They walked slowly, without purpose, but with a kind of stubborn, almost animal tenacity. The woman was alone. She was wearing a threadbare dress, faded and torn at the shoulders. Her hair was long and matted, sticking to her sweaty neck. She hardly blinked, her eyes stared ahead, but it was as if they no longer saw anything. I walked by inertia, because standing meant dying. Her whole body was scorched by the sun. My feet had long since stopped feeling pain, but there were signs of fatigue in my joints, a dull ache that reverberated through my back and neck with every step. Her lips were cracked, and her hands were shaking. But she didn't fall. Her thoughts were shattered like a mirror into which a stone had been thrown. Fragments of the past flared up without warning, a fire in the house, someone's scream, a man's hand, the smell of gunpowder. None of this mattered anymore. She didn't even mention names to herself, fear had long since eaten away the voice inside. She was just walking. Nothing held her back. No place, no memory, no hope. Only the emptiness was flat and heavy, like the road under her feet. One day she just left. She took everything that was left, that is, herself, and stepped out the door. The world has not stopped. The world didn't notice. And since then, he hasn't given her a drop of water or a look of sympathy. She was no longer a human, but a shadow. A lonely, stubborn shadow that was still walking, not knowing why. Every step echoed in her body with the echo of other people's voices, which she no longer wanted to remember. But memory is an insidious thing. She clings to the skin, to the smells, to the pain. Especially for the pain. And so, when her shoulder suddenly pricked, as if she had been whipped, a brief vision flashed before her eyes, the day when he drove her to her knees by the hearth to teach her to be silent. Then another stab in the back, and immediately the smell, not of a campfire, but of burnt wood, smoke, black, dense, suffocating. House. Her house, which once burned to the ground along with everything she owned. She walked and did not know where the strength came from, to survive in all this. Or maybe it's not strength, but just a refusal to die. After all, death is also a luxury, especially if no one is burying you. Especially if no one is crying. She was married once. He was strong, stubborn, with heavy eyes and heavy hands. First he built the walls. Then he broke everything inside them. She was silent, as her mother had taught her. She washed, cooked, and obeyed. And then, when I got pregnant, I thought it would get better. But the child was born weak. And he didn't even live a week. And her husband said it was her fault. She didn't sleep that night. Rain drummed on the roof. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, staring into the darkness. And in the morning she took a bundle with a dress that she had kept since she was a girl and left. I didn't take anything else with me. It's been a long time since then. Months or years, she didn't know. She wandered through farms, villages, mining towns. And she was treated the same everywhere. If not with a stick, then with a dirty grin. First they gave me something to eat. Then they took it away. Her body became a commodity that she used to pay for a night under the roof, for a cup of water, for a piece of blanket. And she stopped calling it pain. Just a deal. Because kindness no longer existed. Not for her. She wasn't looking for the best. Just somewhere I haven't been before. Where maybe no one knows her name or asks who she was. She didn't even know anymore. There was only a woman with empty eyes, in a dusty dress, barefoot under a hot sky, walking deeper into the merciless land. The desert grew quieter with every passing mile, as if it were muffling her. Even thoughts stopped forming into words, there were only sounds inside, a buzzing in the ears, a crackling in the throat, the splash of blood, which gave the last drops of moisture to the sun. The body no longer obeyed. It staggered along with a mechanical monotony, like a wounded animal unaware that it was no longer alive. Once she dreamed of dying. Not now. Right now, death was too lenient an outcome. She wasn't in desire or fear right now. There was only a throbbing in his temples and a salty tear that fell on his cracked lips. Not from pain, not from pity, just from the fact that it was all over. Inside and out. My legs felt weak. My knees were shaking. His gaze clouded over, then cleared up again. And in one of those moments, she saw it. A thin line of smoke rising above the distant horizon. He was trembling in the haze, as if he were a mirage. But she stopped, strained her bleary eyes, and saw it again. Smoke. Real. Dark, gently rising up and spreading out over the flat line of the hill. No thoughts. Just an animal impulse. Smoke means fire. Fire means bonfire. Bonfire means people. And where there are people, there may be at least a sip of water, at least a corner where you can fall and not be burned to ashes by the sun. She moved there without thinking. My knees were buckling, and my breath was coming in short gasps. With each step, it seemed that she was already falling, but she held on again. I came up against the last thought, to reach. Not because she believed, but because I couldn't help but go. Her hunger had already dulled, the pain had gone to the depths. All that was left was the heat pulsing down my spine and the smoke calling from the horizon. A nameless hope that she no longer put anything on, but still clung to it like a dying man clinging to an illusion. She had nothing else in this land. No future, no name. Only smoke is the way to it. The smoke was closer than it looked. Or maybe time had lost count again, and her footsteps had lasted forever. Through the haze of dust, the outlines of a hill began to take shape, then trees, sparse, tough, as if carved from old leather. And then, around the bend of the ravine, when the ground dropped a little and the wind carried a faint smell of smoked meat, she saw the camp. It was a parking lot. Not noisy, not lively, quiet, almost frozen. Several conical teepees stood in a semicircle, bonfires smoldered at the entrances, and from one of them curled the same smoke that had led her here. A few horses were grazing to the side, slowly chewing the grass. Everything was motionless, so much so that it seemed as if she was looking not at a living camp, but at a dream in which time had stopped. Her steps became more cautious. Not because she wanted to be invisible, but because she no longer had the strength to walk confidently. She came out of the bushes, approached slowly, without hiding her fear. She was no longer afraid of anything. And then there are the glances. Several at once. From the back of the wigwam, from behind a man standing by the campfire, from afar, from a woman who was holding a baby at her breast. No one screamed. No one drew a weapon. There wasn't even a whisper. Just the looks, heavy, steady, without surprise. They weren't hostile. And they weren't kind. We just saw her. She stood before them like a shadow scorched by the sun, with a face that had long since stopped reflecting life. And they stood, sat, breathed, and watched. Without moving, without breaking the very silence that only the earth, which knows no hurry, brings. She didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I could talk. And I didn't know if they would understand. But none of that mattered anymore. Her lips twitched, and her legs gave way. She knelt down like fallen grass and just stared into the flames of a nearby campfire. She came. And now it wasn't up to her. She felt the stares as one feels the heat from a fire. It didn't hurt, but it was unbearable. She was not chased, not called, not approached. Everything was as calm as it had been a moment ago. And there was something scary in that silence. She didn't know what those eyes meant. No rage, no desire, no pity. He was standing a little away from the campfire. Above the rest. Not because of his height, but because he wasn't affected by empty movements. He was wearing not so much more jewelry, but more silence. His hair was dark and straight, braided, and there was a glint of steel in his eye, not from the weapon, but from the way he looked. She realized that this was the main one. Or the leader. Or just the one who decides. And when her strength allowed her to rise again, she did the only thing she could. She came closer, without looking into his eyes, and sank down again, already in front of him. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, from an inner emptiness. She didn't expect any sympathy. And she didn't ask for it. I was just taught that everything has a price. Even a mug of water. Even the corner by the campfire. And she's long been used to being that price. She didn't take off her clothes. But her posture, her gaze on the ground, her breathing, everything spoke for her. It was a dumb deal, as old as the earth itself. The body for protection. Silence for warmth. The usual fee that no one discussed. There was no passion, no fear, no resistance inside her. Just fatigue. From everything. She didn't believe that she could be accepted just like that. She didn't believe that anyone could be needed without it. And so, staring into the dust at her feet, head down, she waited. Either consent or rejection. And both options seemed familiar to her. Equal. The silence dragged on. He didn't move. No one was moving. There was something unusual about this silence, not a refusal or an agreement. As if the camp didn't know what to do with her. It was as if these people lived by other laws, where such deals were not needed. But she didn't know about it yet. She only knew one thing: she had offered herself. As always. Because I've forgotten how to live any other way. She was still on her knees, without raising her head, as if she had merged with the ground. Time seemed to slow down. Not a single voice cut through the air, not a single hand moved forward. There was only a crackle in the coals of the campfire, and a light wind that stirred the feathers at the tents and dust on the road. He was standing right in front of her. Tall, silent, with skin weathered by the sun and wind. His face was calm, but not empty. There was something ancient and confident about him, as if he knew the value of everything he saw. Not contempt. Not lust. Just knowledge. She was waiting for a gesture, familiar, rude, unambiguous. But he didn't move. He didn't step closer. He didn't reach out with his hand. His gaze lingered on her for a brief but immensely painful moment, and then he raised his hand, not in threat or command. He just slowly pulled her towards the campfire. Where there was a wooden bowl of water. Where there was a clay pot with a concoction. Where someone, a woman with dark braids, had already moved aside to make room. He didn't say a word. He didn't even point it out directly. But there was a clear boundary in this smooth movement of the hand, not a demand, not a deal, not an order. Invitation. She raised her head. Carefully. First on his arm, then a little higher. And when she met his eyes, she didn't see what she expected in them. There was no usual assessment. There was no male desire. Just a quiet, impenetrable acceptance. Not for what she offered. But in spite of this, he didn't come over. He didn't help her up. He didn't make a sound. He just turned and walked away, as slowly as the wind moves across the plain. And it was more amazing than any touch. She remained on her knees, not knowing if she could believe the gesture. In her world, there was always a price for food and water. But now it was just silence and steam from the pot by the campfire. For the first time in a long time, her breathing stopped, not from fear, but from something strange. Something new. She didn't know what it was called dignity yet. But for the first time, she wasn't forced to pay with herself for what should have been human. It took her a moment to realize that the gesture was real. That he would not be followed by a shout or a sharp order. She sat there for a long time, as if afraid that everything would disappear if she made a wrong move. But the camp remained in the same rhythm, children at the tents, women at the fire, men at the horses. And the water was still quietly splashing in the bowl, and the steam from the food did not dissipate. She got up slowly. It's like a man rising up who doesn't know what to live for, but decides to live a little longer. She walked over to the campfire, where he pointed. She sat down on the edge of the fur covering, as if temporarily, for a moment. She raised the cup to her lips with trembling hands. The water was warm and smelled a little of smoke, but she drank it as if it were life itself. I ate slowly, not because I was shy, but because my body still didn't believe it was true. Someone passed by without even looking at her. Someone sat the child down next to him and untied the bundle of herbs. No one pushed me away. He didn't show any dislike. He did not demand a price. Nobody. There was no loneliness in this silence. There was something more, calmness. She no longer clung to food as prey. She was no longer trembling from fear that her arm would be twisted or kicked out. For the first time in months, eating wasn't a gesture of submission. And water is not humiliation. She sat closer to the fire, hugging her knees. Her arms were still as thin as branches and covered with traces of pain. But a strange heaviness settled inside them, not fear, but satiety. The feeling that no one would touch her today. That the night would be dark, but not scary. The sun disappeared behind the hills. The fire crackled softly, and the starry sky slowly opened above her. The wind became cooler. She lay down by the fire, not clenching her fists, not hiding her face, not expecting a rude shout. For the first time in a long time, sleep came to her, not as an escape, but as a shelter. And there, on the very edge of sleep, where thoughts still wander between light and darkness, she felt something very faint. Very far away. Not trust. No. But a warm, almost forgotten little feeling that maybe something would change. Hope. small as a spark in the ashes. Barely noticeable. But alive. The night gradually surrendered to dawn, and the world around seemed to awaken with it. A thin, light mist streamed across the plains, wrapping around the trunks of tall pines and a spreading carpet of grass. The air was fresh and cool, but it already felt the approach of heat, the relentless sun of the Wild West. There was an unusual silence in the Comanche camp, the soft rustle of the wind and the muffled sound of hooves could barely be heard. The deerskin tents were neatly arranged around a large campfire, which was now smoldering only with light red embers. Somewhere nearby, the cautious chirping of birds could be heard, filling the space with the light music of nature. The woman slowly opened her eyes, feeling the first rays of the sun touching her face. His body was still exhausted and weakened, but now, in this silence, it seemed a little less broken. She carefully turned her head, listening to every sound, trying not to disturb the peace into which this new world was woven. Every movement seemed important, every breath seemed priceless. There was none of the usual noise of cities or the screams of people untouched by her past and scars. There was only the camp and the surrounding nature, wild, but living by its own rules. Something that had long been extinguished was slowly igniting in her soul, a cautious curiosity, a faint hope. She didn't know what this new day would bring, but for now she could just let herself breathe. To be a part of this world is, for now, only on the edge, between the old and the new. In the distance, at the edge of the camp, the chief stood motionless. His tall silhouette stood out against the background of the first rays of sunlight that touched the tops of the hills and sparkled on his wrinkled face. Taciturn and calm, he seemed to be a part of this vast expanse, sturdy, but with internal cracks that only he could see. His eyes were deep and penetrating, like a mirror reflecting the loss, bitterness, and wisdom of many years. They told a story of loneliness, not emptiness, but fullness of pain and understanding. He was not alone in the usual sense, there were people around, children and adults, his tribe, but there was a separate silence in his soul that no one could fill. Looking at the woman waking up by the campfire, he was in no hurry to come up or speak. Instead, his gaze was attentive and careful, as if he was trying to read her mind and understand her heart without words. This silence carried respect and quiet support, a sign that here she could be herself, without games and pretenses. The leader knew that the kindness he was showing was not a gesture of strength or authority, but a call for mutual respect. He realized long ago that strength is not in words or orders, but in understanding the pain of another, in the ability to simply be there without intruding or demanding. And as the camp slowly woke up, and the first shadows of the day stretched across the ground, his eyes continued to watch, quietly, without pressure, as if promising that peace could be found in this place if only he allowed himself to be trusted. Behind the calm and unperturbed appearance of the leader, the severity of the experience was hidden. His past was shrouded in a shadow of loss that time had not erased. Many years ago, the family that was the meaning of his life disappeared in the flames of violent conflicts and painful goodbyes. The loss left a deep mark on his soul, turning him into a man who learned to keep his pain in silence. These years of loneliness had not made him callous. On the contrary, they gave him a different perspective on life, deep, insightful, able to see the pain of others without judgment. He knew what it was like to be lost, left alone with himself and the emptiness around him. When the woman showed up at his camp, exhausted, broken, and desperate, he didn't see her as just an outsider. He saw a reflection of his own pain and loneliness. His decision to help her was not an act of pity or mercy. It was a quiet but firm request from the heart, to give this spiritual wound the opportunity to heal, albeit slowly and carefully. He did not promise easy ways or quick healing. But looking at her, he realized that sometimes true power lies in offering a simple presence, a roof over your head, food, silent acceptance. Without words, without conditions. Just to be around. And in this silent understanding, a new hope was born, quiet and cautious, like the first rays of the sun that touched his face at dawn. She was sitting by the campfire, exhausted but attentive. There was a contradiction in my soul, something unfamiliar and unusual was fighting with the usual fear and wariness. She looked at the chief and the camp around her, trying to figure out why there wasn't the deal she was so used to, a deal where kindness always had a price, where food and shelter invariably had to be paid for with pain or fear. Years of wandering and betrayal had developed a defense in her, trusting meant opening herself up to a new blow. She knew that she often offered herself, not out of desire, but out of desperation. Each step left scars on his body and soul. But here there is only silence, unconditional attention, simple food and water, and a calm that seemed impossible. It was weird and scary. It seemed that there should be something in return. But there was nothing. No demands, no expectations, no words. This simple acceptance disrupted her habitual world, overturned her inner beliefs. Doubts and pain were intertwined with an unaccustomed hope. She tried to believe that it was possible to just be, without a deal, without pain, without fear. But it was hard to accept this gift, which she was not ready for. Nevertheless, somewhere deep inside, a feeling arose that this was not a trap, not an illusion, but the beginning of something real. Slowly, step by step, she learned to let go of fear and doubt, allowing herself to feel for the first time in a long time that simple kindness could also exist. The days in the camp flowed by quietly, like a river, slowly carrying away all worries and doubts. A special silence arose between the woman and the leader, not empty, but filled with meaning, deep and indisputable. They looked at each other without words, but each one's gaze carried more and more respect and cautious interest. The leader, restrained and wise, allowed her to stay close, not interfering in her inner world, but always ready to support her if necessary. His presence was like a reliable shield, invisible but tangible. He didn't demand explanations or answers, he just gave me the opportunity to be myself. The woman, in turn, looked at him closely. There was a mixture of wariness and growing curiosity in her eyes. She searched for answers in his silence, trying to understand why this man was so different from those she had known before. There was no condemnation or desire to take anything in his gaze, only a quiet acceptance, rare and valuable, like a spring in the desert. So, day after day, a silent bond was born between them, strong and tender at the same time. They learned to trust actions and looks rather than words, finding in this new language the power that can heal wounds and give hope. The moment came when the leader, without uttering a word, made his first small but significant gesture. He carefully handed her a vessel of water, a simple gift, but it contained much more depth than it seemed at first glance. This gesture meant not just an offer of a drink, but an invitation to mutual trust, so that she could begin to accept the world around her without fear or expectation of pain. The woman froze for a moment, as if not daring to believe in the reality of what was happening. Water, which had been lacking for so long, now seemed not just a thirst quencher, but a symbol of a new beginning. She accepted the vessel, feeling something change inside. The familiar walls of despair and distrust began to crack. This moment was not loud or solemn. He was quiet, almost invisible, but there was a power in him that could change fate. Here, amidst the dust and winds of the Wild West, the first spark of trust was born, delicate and fragile, but already inextinguishable. The woman looked at the leader with a new feeling. Perhaps here, in this silent and simple world, one could find not only shelter for the body, but also peace for the soul. It was a step towards putting the past behind him and allowing himself to live anew, even if the path ahead was long and difficult. The sun was slowly sinking below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of red and orange, like a blazing fire that was reflected in the eyes of the woman and the leader. They were sitting next to each other by the campfire, shadows dancing on their faces, and silence reigned around them, not empty, but filled with meaning. Something was changing inside each of them, as if a new story was being born out of deep loneliness and pain, quiet, careful, but real. Their silence said more than words could say. There was no past rushing back, and there was no fear of a future that had not yet arrived. For the first time in a long time, she felt something tender begin to form in her chest. Not trust, it was still too early, but a feeling that she was not alone. He, in turn, looked at her with such attention, as if in her presence he found the answer to questions that he had been asking himself alone for a long time. This sunset became a symbol of change, not loud and stormy, but quiet and inevitable, which gradually opened up a new road for them. She may have been difficult and full of trials, but she was no longer alone. It was at this moment, under the flames of the campfire and the silent stars, that something more began to emerge, the beginning of their life together, which was supposed to give them both what they had been looking for so long, a home, a heart and a future. The days passed slowly, like water in a calm river, and each of them brought new shades of habit and understanding. The woman became a part of this secluded world, not loudly, not immediately, but faithfully and sincerely. She got up at first light, when a light mist was still creeping over the ground, and began to do things that seemed simple but important. Caring for the campfire became a ritual for her. She carefully placed dry branches so that the flame would not go out without creating unnecessary smoke. There was something more to this little thing, taking care of the warmth and light, which seemed to be a symbol of safety. Sometimes she carried water from a nearby stream, carefully pouring it into clay vessels, as if carefully storing every drop. She looked after the horses with quiet respect. Each movement was slow and deliberate. She combed the manes, examined the hooves, gently stroked the muscular necks. It was not just a job, but a form of connection with nature and the life around her, which helped her feel like a part of something big and permanent. Harvesting firewood under the scorching sun has also become part of her new schedule. She learned to choose the best branches so that the fire would not go out and create too much ash. Every movement, slow, careful, without unnecessary fuss, reminded that there was no rush, only regularity and attention to simple things. These were days without words and promises, without haste and loud feelings. Only the things that were done quietly and sincerely. Gradually, fatigue appeared in her gaze, but also something else, the beginning of finding peace within herself. In this new rhythm, she learned to trust, not people, not words, but simple, unchanging actions. All around, the tranquility of the camp, the sound of the wind in the grass, the rare cries of birds. Here, among these simple tasks, the woman found new strength, not through vivid events, but through every seemingly inconspicuous moment of her life. It was in this silence and routine that a new story was born, a story in which she could just be herself. The leader remained motionless, as if carved out of the landscape itself. His figure seemed to be an integral part of the camp and its silence. He did not make demands, did not expect a trick, did not impose conditions. His silent presence was like a quiet stone by the river, constant and reliable. He didn't interfere in her business, but his eyes were always on her. Without judgment, without impatience, they simply watched, as a person watches the flow of water, without interfering, but understanding every movement. Sometimes he would gently help, he would hand over the instrument, adjust something in her hands, without words, without unnecessary gestures. This surveillance was not a control or an attempt to control. Rather, it was a careful support that the woman felt in the air around her. The leader gave her space without limiting her freedom, but he was there to protect her if necessary. So, in silence and without pressure, a quiet understanding grew between them, one that did not require words or promises. There was respect in his gaze, and cautious gratitude in hers. This new rhythm of life was slowly but surely awakening a sense of calm within her. For the first time in a long time, the woman allowed herself to breathe freely, a deep, even breath, not interrupted by fear or weariness. There was no pressure, threat, or attempts at manipulation. There was no need to hide fatigue or weakness, to pretend to be strong or inconspicuous. Her body, exhausted from the endless running and fighting, finally began to rest. She could feel the tension slowly lifting off her shoulders, like a heavy armor. There was something new and frightening about this calmness, at the same time the possibility of being vulnerable without fear of punishment. Every morning brought a little relief, like a thin ray of light through dark clouds. She could afford to sit by the campfire without thinking that she would have to defend herself or prove anything now. This simple opportunity to just breathe and be has become something priceless for her. For the first time, there was a man nearby who did not require words and explanations, did not expect a trick. His silence was not emptiness, but fullness, unconditional support. This allowed the woman to start trusting herself, first, and then this quiet world around her. This feeling of calmness was a tiny seed of hope that she carefully picked up, taking her time, taking her time. Perhaps it could grow into something more, into a new life, where pain and loneliness would be replaced by something bright and real. Over time, they formed their own language between them, without words, without the need to explain every movement or thought. Their looks began to speak louder than any conversation, and light gestures conveyed feelings that could not always be expressed in words. He wasn't in a hurry, she wasn't in a hurry. In the silence of their shared space, a new feeling was born, not fear, not suspicion, but quiet respect, like two travelers who have found support and peace in each other. Every morning she watched him get up first, how carefully he tended to the camp, and in these small, barely noticeable actions she read his strength and gentleness at the same time. He looked at her differently, not holding back his emotions, but not breaking the silence either. In this silence, they became closer than ever. Not a single sound was superfluous, not a single movement was accidental. It was as if everything was part of an invisible thread that connected their destinies. Without words, without promises, they built a bridge of trust that allowed them to be close without fear. This mute connection turned out to be stronger than many conversations, and it was she who became the first step towards healing the wounds of the past. Every day, the woman saw more and more clearly in the leader not just a silent camp guard, but a man with a rich inner world, someone who carries within himself the bitterness of loss and the strength of an unconquered spirit. His calmness was not indifference, but rather a deep understanding of life and its cruel lessons. She noticed how his gaze stopped at simple things, at dawn, on the branches of trees, on the movement of the wind. His soul was reflected in these moments, quiet and strong at the same time. He didn't talk about his pain, but his silence was louder than any words. The leader, in turn, began to appreciate in the woman not only her resilience and ability to survive, but also the sincerity with which she accepted this new world. He saw how she slowly stopped being afraid, how a light appeared in her eyes, a light that had long since gone out. Respect grew between them based on experience, pain, and mutual recognition of their weaknesses and strengths. This respect became the foundation on which something more could be built, trust that does not require words. In this silence, where every movement meant more than 1,000 words, they began to understand each other in a way they had never been able to with anyone before. They were not bound by promises or responsibilities, but by the quiet power of mutual respect and acceptance. As the sun slowly sank below the horizon, the colors of the sky softly shimmered from orange to dark blue. The camp was plunged into silence, where only the crackling of the campfire and the light rustle of the grass could be heard. The woman sat next to the chief, felt the night chill gradually give way to a warm comfort that she had not experienced for a long time. A small spark was igniting inside her, not just physical warmth, but something deeper, barely noticeable and gentle, like a quiet sprout of hope in the desert of her soul. She realized that here, among these silent, proud people, she had found not just shelter from the winds of fate, but something that began to revive her heart. The leader was sitting next to him, his face lit up by fire, and his gaze remained as calm and deep as ever. Their silence was not empty, it filled the space between them with understanding that needed no words. It was not a story about salvation, but a story about the birth of something new, a quiet bond based on mutual respect and that very rare gift called hope. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself not to clench her fists, not to hold fears in her heart, not to hide weaknesses. At that moment, everything seemed possible. And even though the unknown lay ahead, she wasn't ready to face it alone. That was how one day of their lives ended, the day when two lonely souls found in each other the beginning of a new story that was just unfolding, quietly and wordlessly, like the wind that brought freshness to the barren plains of the Wild West. Night was slowly descending on the camp, turning the sky deep blue and purple, as if the earth itself was holding its breath in anticipation of a thunderstorm. The wind began to pick up, at first with a soft rustle, then turning into a whistling gust that drove dust and dry leaves across the plain. Above the horizon, the clouds were gathering, grouped into heavy, gloomy clouds, resembling the shadows of long-forgotten fears. A faint smell of ozone and moist earth permeated the air, promising the imminent approach of a storm. The whole camp seemed to freeze, the horses stopped neighing, and the men and women fell silent, listening to the harbingers of bad weather. The flames of the campfire swayed in time with the wind, casting dancing shadows on the tents, which seemed to be living creatures, carrying anxiety and uncertainty. Every sound, the crackle of a twig, the rustle of fabric, the rustle of feet, seemed louder than usual, as if nature itself was preparing for something important and inevitable. At that moment, the woman, who was already used to the harshness and loneliness, felt how the tension in the air intensified the fear hidden deep inside. She knew that the storm would not just change the weather, it would bring with it memories as painful as the scars on her skin, and force her to face what she had been running from for so long. In a secluded corner of the camp, in a tent, the woman felt the sky above her head shrink under the weight of the coming storm. The wind that passed through the rough branches and dry grass echoed in her heart, making her blood run cold. She lay listening to the howling of the wind and the patter of raindrops, heralding a downpour that would soon cover the ground. The silence around her became almost unbearable, as if time itself had slowed down, allowing her thoughts to penetrate into the darkest corners of her memory. Memories that had been hidden for a long time behind a wall of pain and fatigue burst out like ghosts of the past that she couldn't banish. Every moment seemed like a new wound, the echo of screams, the sound of hooves, the cold hands of violence that never really let go of her. These images returned with special force that night, when the storm tore the sky and shook the earth, raising a storm in my soul that was no less ferocious. The fear she had been trying to forget was now back, like a cold shadow covering her body. My heart was beating fast, but not from the danger outside, but from the one that lurked inside, loneliness, loss and betrayal. Her eyes, full of tears, stared into the darkness of the tent, where it seemed that even the air was saturated with pain. She felt helplessness taking over her soul again, making her doubt that there was any point in holding on. But it was in this silence and fear, amidst the sounds of the thunderstorm, that she felt that she was not alone. Someone was nearby, someone who was watching, who silently shared her pain and did not push her away, no matter what. When the dark clouds had almost covered the camp with their heavy blanket, and the wind was rushing into every corner with force, the leader cautiously left his tent. His footsteps were quiet, almost noiseless on the withered earth, and his every gesture carried the deepest respect for her personal space. He didn't say a word. Here, in this storm, the words seemed empty, and the silence was the most expressive. When he reached the woman's hiding place, he stopped for a moment, watching her tense breathing and tired features illuminated by rare flashes of lightning. The chief gently, as if with tenderness, unfolded the blanket he always carried with him and covered her trembling shoulders. His movement was neat, as if he was touching something fragile and expensive. He sat down next to her, but not too close, so as not to disturb her space, and at that moment there was no need for words or touches. His presence became her mainstay, quiet, reliable, and self-explanatory. The leader's gaze remained calm and penetrating, as if saying that she was not alone in this storm, that even on the darkest nights someone was ready to keep the light on. Silently, in the embrace of thunder and wind, they shared this night, a night that slowly began to ignite in their souls the first flame of trust and mutual warmth. The night, filled with the noise of a thunderstorm, became the point of no return. In the darkness where the light of lightning illuminated their faces, something invisible and powerful appeared, the first spark, gently smoldering between them, quiet but inescapable. It was a feeling that couldn't be expressed in words, too subtle, too personal to be captured in a voice. It filled the space between them, like an invisible bridge connecting two lonely souls. They sat side by side in silence, but the silence no longer seemed empty or oppressive. It embraced, warmed, filled with peace. The leader's presence was like a quiet force, motionless and confident, ready to lend a shoulder in the darkest hour. For the first time, the woman felt that she could just be herself, without fears and protective masks. On this night, amidst the rumble of thunder and the whisper of the wind, a bond was forming, soft and strong at the same time. It wasn't love in the usual sense, it was something much deeper, which begins with trust and patience, with understanding without words. A quiet warmth slowly spread inside them, promising change in a new path that they could walk together. In the depths of the night, as the storm gradually subsided, trust began to awaken between them, slow and cautious, like the first shoots after a long winter. The woman allowed herself to let go of the burden of the past, not with words, but with a look that sought understanding and acceptance. Her gestures became less tense, her breathing became smoother, and her thoughts became clearer. It was more than a conversation, it was a silent confession of the soul, conveyed through every movement, every touch of the gaze. The leader responded to her tacit acceptance with his own story. His eyes hid the bitter loss of his wife and son, who had left too soon, leaving behind a void and pain that he had carried for many years. This pain didn't fall on her in words, it was in his every look, in every movement, in every shadow that fell on his face in the light of the dying campfire. Their silent exchange revealed a mutual wound and understanding that needed no explanation. They became for each other not only a shelter from the outside world, but also a mirror, a reflection of pain and hope, loneliness and a desire to feel connected again. That night, the silence between them was filled with meaning, and the distance was reduced to the depths of the heart. The night remained calm, despite the recent storm, and in this silence something new was emerging between them, a subtle, fragile understanding based on mutual vulnerability. They were no longer just two lonely souls who happened to be next to each other, but became participants in a quiet dialogue where every movement and glance mattered. The woman, accustomed to hiding her wounds, allowed herself to lower her guard, not being afraid to be weak in front of this silent leader. He, in turn, did not demand explanations or promises from her, but simply accepted her for who she was, with the past, with pain and with those shadows that trailed behind her. Their bond was wordless, but deep. In that silence, respect, trust, and the first sparks of warmth were born, which could turn into something more. They both understood that here, in this secluded corner of the world, they could find peace and begin healing. And although their paths were just beginning to intertwine, there was already a promise in the air, the promise of a new life where the pain of the past would not dictate conditions, and mutual support would become a solid foundation. This night was the first step towards moving forward together, slowly, carefully, but no longer alone. She woke up to the sound of the wind playing in the leaves, and the warm light of the setting sun penetrated her corner of the camp. For the first time in a long time, there wasn't just fatigue and pain inside her. Instead, something new was awakening, a quiet but steady force that seemed to lift her from the depths of despair. This force wasn't loud and assertive, it was calm and confident, like a river flowing steadily forward despite the rocks and turns. She no longer felt like just a victim of circumstances. The path of survival, which seemed endless and difficult, began to make sense. There was a purpose in her gaze, not just to hold out for another day, but to build something of her own, something real. There was a spark of hope in her heart that she had long forgotten. Every movement was now filled with meaning, every action a small step towards a new life. For the first time in a long time, she felt that she might not just be a shadow of the past, but someone who chooses her own path. It was the beginning of a new stage, not only in her life, but also in her soul. There was a great power hidden in this quiet awakening that would soon change everything around her. And she was ready to take on this challenge. She devoted every day to creating her own small space in this alien, but no longer hostile world. She carefully gathered branches and dry herbs to make a corner by the fire, where she could hide from the wind and rain. Her hands, though tired from previous trials, now worked with determination and precision, as if they were painting a new chapter of their lives. Among the materials at hand, scraps of cloth, leather and thread, she made simple but reliable clothes that protected her from the cold and winds. Each stitch was not just a job, but an act of reinventing oneself, a step towards independence. She did not wait for help, she took responsibility for herself into her own hands, feeling a special power in this. Her efforts did not go unnoticed. The rest of the camp's residents, accustomed to her silent steadfastness, began to look at her with renewed respect. The woman became a part of the tribe not only in body, but also in spirit, weaving her hard-working energy into the life of this small world on the border of the prairies. Every day she absorbed more and more the rhythms and traditions of this tribe, feeling how her inner strength grew with new knowledge. The woman did not stay away when someone needed help, she learned the art of healing from healers, absorbing the subtleties of herbs and tinctures, which gave relief and strength. Her hands became gentle and confident as she lubricated the wounds, carefully bandaged the sore spots, whispering to herself that now she was not just a survivor, but a healer, part of the community that could support and give hope. Other members of the tribe began to pay attention to her not only as a stranger who had come to their world, but also as a woman who could be useful and caring. So she gradually fit into everyday life, felt that she was accepted and appreciated here not for who she was before, but for who she is becoming now. In this quiet confession, she was discovering a new meaning for her existence, leaving fear and loneliness behind. Gradually, respect came to her, like a gentle but steady stream that could not be stopped. The members of the tribe, observing her efforts and perseverance, began to treat her differently, not just as an alien, but as an equal, worthy of trust and support. Their gazes stopped being wary, replaced by warm and attentive ones. She became a participant in their traditions, adopted their customs, and the tribe, as a living organism, began to accept her into its ranks. Every day she felt an invisible but solid circle of respect growing around her, which gave her the strength to move forward. This recognition was not just a sign of change for her, but a new breath, a fresh hope that in this place her past of pain and loneliness could give way to a future filled with meaning and warmth. With each passing day, the distance between her and the chief was getting smaller. More and more often they found themselves next to a campfire, where wood crackled softly, and the night air was filled with warmth and peace. There was no need for words in these silent meetings, their looks spoke for themselves, conveying more than could be expressed in a voice. She learned to read in his eyes the depth that hid the pain and wisdom of many years. He, in turn, listened to her quiet gestures and aspirations, seeing in her not only a vulnerable woman, but also a strong personality who was becoming a part of his world every day. A special bond was forming between them, a thin but strong thread of mutual understanding and respect. It was more than just a shelter or friendship, it was the first step towards building a future together, where fears and loneliness gradually dissolved into the warmth of a new feeling. In the silence of the night, when the stars twinkled over the camp, a new feeling began to awaken in her heart, quiet confidence in herself and in the future. She was no longer the lost woman who once felt like the whole world was against her. Now a power was growing inside her, not loud and sharp, but calm and steady, like the roots of an old tree going deep into the ground. This inner change did not come suddenly, it was the result of every day they lived, every breath they shared with the leader, every casual glance and gesture that united their souls in silent agreement. Hope was awakening in her, not an illusory dream, but a real feeling that a new life begins right here, among the open spaces and silence, under the protection of one silent but strong man. She was ready to move on, not alone, but together. And this knowledge filled her with peace and warmth, gave her meaning and strength for new steps on the path that was just beginning. The gray morning was enveloping the prairie when the woman's gaze to the west noticed the first warning signs. There, on the horizon, the horsemen were slowly approaching, their silhouettes beginning to loom through the light morning mist. Smoke from the campfires of the white settlers rose into the sky, shattering the tranquility of the wide plain. The wind carried the smells of other people's campfires, mixed with the familiar scent of pine needles and earth. A weight of anxiety settled in the air, an indistinct but palpable premonition of impending danger. This quiet anxiety seemed to freeze between them and the wild, reminding them that the world around them is changing and the peace of their shelter may soon be disturbed. In the camp, the words began to spread like the wind blowing seeds across the prairie. Whispers and glances met in the shadows of the trees and around the campfires, overgrown with guesses and anxiety. There were fears among the conversations that the settlers were looking for someone who shouldn't be here, that their peace might be disturbed by a runaway woman hiding among them. These rumors, like shadows, gradually enveloped the tribe, awakening doubts and wariness in their hearts. There was a vague threat in the air, and everyone knew that changes were coming, from which no one could shut themselves out. In the silence of the night, she sat alone by the campfire, pondering a difficult decision. Her heart was torn apart. On the one hand, the house and the people who had accepted her as one of their own; on the other, the shadow of impending danger that she could not ignore. She knew that her presence could be the beginning of trouble for the tribe, for those who trusted her and protected her. Fear for their lives and peace made her decide to leave in order to protect those who had become her family, even if it meant abandoning everything she had worked so hard to build. That's how the idea was born, to leave the camp, quietly, without noise, to hide in the night and not cause destruction. The leader, accustomed to loneliness and silence, for the first time did not keep back his words. His gaze was firm and unwavering, and his voice was quiet but determined. For him, she had already become more than just a wanderer or a guest. She is a part of his world, a part of his heart. He couldn't and wouldn't let her go alone into the unknown, into the danger that threatened them both. It wasn't an order or a demand, it was a promise of protection and support, a manifestation of the deep bond that had sprung up between them in silence and trials. He stood by, ready to face the threat shoulder to shoulder, because now they are a family. Tension hung in the air, like dark clouds before a storm. They both felt the weight of the challenges ahead, fear for the future, fear of losing what they had been searching for alone for so long. In the woman's heart, the desire to protect the tribe and the fear of being left without support were fighting. The leader, accustomed to his own strength and determination, was now faced with a new weakness, the fear of losing someone with whom he was ready to share his entire life. Their silence spoke more than words. It was a quiet but deep conflict where fears and hopes intertwined in a complex pattern. But at the same time, the power of the new union was already shining in their eyes, the promise to go through any trials together, not letting go of each other. The time has come to act. Without further ado, they set about preparing the camp together, like old warriors whose tacit agreement mattered more than any speech. The chief distributed his duties wisely, fortifying shelters, checking supplies, and sending out scouts to learn as much as possible about the approach of strangers. The woman, now no longer just a guest, but a full-fledged member of the tribe, took part in these chores with determination and concentration. Every movement was filled with meaning, preparation for the inevitable, when the future depended on unity and willingness to face danger together. A quiet confidence grew in their hearts. No matter how fate turned out, they were no longer alone. The days filled with anxiety and uncertainty were woven into the fabric of their life together, stretching out like a thick fog over the prairies. The woman stood at the edge of the camp, peering at where the horizon merged with the gray sky. There, in the west, the shadow of danger was approaching. Deep down, she felt the heavy burden of choosing whether to stay and share the fate of those who accepted her, or to leave to protect them, preserving peace and security. Her heart was racing between gratitude and fear, between the desire to be near her and the realization of the threat she could bring. The leader watched her from the shadows, silent and unwavering, but there was a depth of emotion and anxiety in his gaze. He saw not only the fugitive who had become a part of their lives, but also the woman who had awakened forgotten emotions in him, caring, hope, and perhaps love. His wisdom told him that danger was near, and he understood that not only she was at risk, but also he and the tribe, which already perceived her as their own. A contradiction flared up inside him, to protect and keep him close, or to let him go for the sake of safety. There was no place for loud words in this quiet conflict. It was all in their eyes, in their restrained gestures, in the way they both tried to find a balance between their hearts and their minds. She felt her inner strength growing, her willingness to sacrifice herself, and he felt his determination not to lose her, no matter what. So, between two people whose union was fragile but full of meaning, an invisible thread of struggle for the future, for the opportunity to be together, despite all the adversities and fears, was spinning. In the silence of the camp, under the weight of the impending threat, a quarrel arose between them that did not require words. Their eyes avoided meeting, and their silence spoke louder than any speech. Resentment burned in her eyes, not at him, but at fate, which once again put them in front of a choice where there were no simple solutions. She could feel the fear seeping into every movement, into every breath, making her heart tighten into a knot. He stood motionless, his lips pressed together, as if trying to hold back the storm inside himself. His gestures were restrained but tense, barely noticeable hand movements, deep sighs, and fatigue in his shoulders. An unspoken pain hung between them, like an invisible wall that separated the past from the future, dreams from reality. Instead of words, there are short glances full of disappointment and unwillingness to hurt each other. Everyone understood that now was not the time for accusations, but that did not lessen the gravity of the moment. Their hearts spoke the language of silence, a language that only the two of them understood, filled with bitterness and hope at the same time. In this silence, their inner struggle sounded, the struggle to keep in touch, for the right to hope for light at the end of a dark path. And although there was a distance between them, it was only temporary, as if preparing for the fact that there was a choice ahead that would change everything. The night enveloped the camp in its darkness, like a blanket, under which lurked fears and unresolved thoughts. A mental anxiety penetrated this silence, a quiet but persistent whisper of doubt and pain. Each of them was left alone with himself, trying to find an answer that slipped through his fingers like sand. The woman was tossing and turning in her bed, her eyes staring into the darkness, but her thoughts were far beyond the camp. Memories mixed with hope, fear intertwined with the desire to protect those who had become her home. My heart was beating fast, as if anticipating that a new chapter filled with uncertainty would begin with dawn. The chief, sitting by the campfire, looked into the fire, seeing in the dancing flames a reflection of his own doubts. His shoulders seemed heavier than usual, and his gaze was deeper and more thoughtful. In this silence, he sought strength to accept the inevitable and keep hope in himself. The night, although full of worries, gave them a space for reflection and a silence in which determination was born. Before dawn, when the world had not yet woken up, their souls were preparing for separation, but there was a spark in their hearts, a promise that this story was not over yet. The first faint rays of dawn gently touched the camp, painting the sky in pale pink and golden tones. At that moment, when the world was waking up, she already knew it was time to leave. The weight of the decision fell on her shoulders, but the desire to protect those who had become her home was stronger than the fear of loneliness. She quietly packed her things, neatly folded everything that might be useful on the road. Deep down, fear and hope were fighting, but an inner voice was pointing the way, to a place where her presence would not become a threat to the leader and the tribe. Before she left, she approached him. His eyes, tired and wise, met hers, without words, without unnecessary sounds. Slowly, she took off a thin necklace decorated with simple but significant beads from her neck. She left him this token of gratitude and love, a silent promise that despite the separation, a part of her would remain here, among those who accepted her. Then, without turning around, she took the first step away from the camp, into a new world full of suspense. The leader remained standing, holding in his hands a gift that had become more than an ornament for him, a symbol of a bond that could not be broken even by distance. At that moment, the dawn gave them not only light, but also quiet hope for a future where the heart could find its way home. He stood in the shade of the trees, watching her leave the camp. His gaze was calm, without a single word, but a storm was raging inside, mixed feelings of pain and understanding. He did not stop her, did not interfere with her choice, although every cell of his body protested against separation. He knew he couldn't force her to stay, it was her path, her struggle. But in the silence of his soul burned the flame of loss, which did not fade, despite the outward calm. Her every move left a mark on his heart, and he silently promised himself to keep their moments together in his memory. His acceptance was not a weakness, but a deep strength, respect for her freedom and determination. The leader remained in place, clutching the necklace in his hand, as a symbol that even when the paths diverge, the connection does not disappear. He knew that sometimes true love is the ability to let go without destroying what was created together. His heart was like a broken mirror, every crack reflected the pain that parting brought. But along with this heaviness, there was also a gentle spark of hope in his soul that their path was not yet complete. The leader looked into the distance, where she disappeared into the morning mist, and in this image he saw not a farewell, but the promise of a new beginning. This hope warmed him like a quiet flame in the night, reminding him that the bond between them was stronger than distance and time. He knew that their stories had yet to intertwine, that fate was not an accident, but a complex pattern of choice and faith. And although there was sadness in his soul now, it did not drown out the inner light that promised that love, even interrupted, could rekindle when the time came. With these thoughts, he returned to the tribe, keeping in his heart the necklace that had become a symbol of their common strength and the future that still awaited them both. The desolate plain stretched out before her, boundless and open, like a mirror reflecting the restlessness of her soul. The wind stirred the grasses and the dry leaves rustled underfoot, creating a quiet but relentless noise, as if nature itself was trying to convey something important. Overhead, the sky was heavy, covered with sparse clouds, which exuded cold and unpredictability. The woman's steps sounded detached, each step seemed like a small challenge to loneliness, which has now become not just a condition, but a difficult reality. In the distance, on the horizon, between the hills and the sparse trees, shadows began to appear, the figures of horsemen. Their voices, barely audible at first, grew louder, interspersed with the clatter of hooves and the crackle of dry branches under their hooves. They were approaching like dark harbingers of danger, bearing the news of the approaching pursuers. Her heart was racing, but she didn't let the fear get the better of her. Here, in the midst of the endless plain, she was alone, but not defenseless. The wind, the emptiness, and the silence around her became her only companions in this moment of waiting. The way back was closed, there was only the unknown ahead, but every step brought her closer to a decision that would change everything. The first glimmer of the approaching dawn was flickering in the distance, mixing with the dark silhouettes of the hunters, and her gaze firmly fixed on this chase, as if trying to predict the outcome. This plain became the arena where her fate was decided, and every moment was filled with tension, ready to explode at any moment. With each step, her heart beat faster, like a drum calling for escape. The sound of hooves and the voices of hunters grew louder, their shadows on the horizon growing like a dark wave rolling over her with ruthless force. The wind now seemed not to be a friend, but an enemy, tearing the last of her strength out of her hair and reminding her of the inevitability of persecution. She quickened her pace, breaking into a run, feeling her pulse racing in her temples, her breathing becoming harsh, but not letting panic get the better of her. She focused on every move. The plain, which had seemed endless and open, now turned into a trap where every bush and hill could hide the enemy. My eyes were constantly searching for cover: sparse trees, rocks, uneven ground, anything that could save me for a moment to catch my breath and rethink the path. The hunters were approaching faster and faster, their voices now sounding like the angry whispers of the wind, adding to the anxiety and hopelessness. Her steps became lighter and lighter, but the fear wouldn't let go. Every sound could mean the end, every shadow a trap. Tension was building inside, as if time was slowing down, and the whole world had shrunk to those few moments between life and danger. Then, when it seemed that her pursuers had almost caught her, the sound of hooves came from afar faster than anyone else, like a storm bringing hope and protection. It was him, the leader, approaching swiftly on horseback, ready to fight and risk for her. At the most critical moment, when the shadows of the hunters had almost reached her, a dull sound of hooves could be heard from afar, which at first seemed to be the usual sound of the plain, but soon turned into the menacing roar of an approaching storm. A figure appeared on the horizon, strong and determined, as if the wind itself had taken the form of a man. It was him, the leader, riding a mighty horse, ready to defend himself. Without words, without unnecessary movements, he was like a shadow merging into the night plain. A bow appeared in his hands, a weapon that he knew how to wield expertly, accurately and deadly. His eyes were focused, his face expressed calmness and unwavering determination, as if the whole world depended on this single moment. He raced across the plain, heading straight for his pursuers, who did not even have time to notice that their victim had a protector. The horse beneath him seemed to be an extension of his body, fast and strong, as if the earth itself had answered the call of the leader. His appearance turned the tide of events. He was not just a warrior, but a symbol of protection and hope for her. Without a word, he stood between the woman and the hunters, ready to face any threat, not sparing himself for her sake. The courage coming from him filled the air with new strength. He wasn't just saving her, he was proving that their union had become stronger than any danger, that he wouldn't let her go a step further. After a tense encounter on the open plain, they turned their horses together towards the dense forest, a sheltering shelter where the shadows of the trees thickened and hid them from prying eyes. The forest greeted them with a quiet whisper of leaves and coolness, as if it embraced them with its calmness after the anger and bustle of the open steppe. The sounds of the pursuers gradually faded away, giving way to a soft silence that filled the space between the tall trunks and dense branches. Here, among the greenery and shadows, it seemed as if time had slowed down, giving them a chance to take a break and reflect on what was happening. She could feel the tension gradually leaving her body, giving way to fatigue and relief. The leader next to him was quiet and focused, but there was determination and concern in his every move. The forest has become their refuge, a place where they can hide, recuperate and start a new chapter. There was no place for fear, only the natural harmony of nature, the sounds of birds and the rustle of the wind. They walked side by side, not needing words, because there was more meaning in this silence than in many conversations. It was a new stage of their journey, a step into the unknown, but made together. The forest gave them a chance to start, where the past could be left behind, and hope shone ahead. In the depths of the forest, hidden from prying eyes and dangerous enemies, they found a secluded place, a small clearing flooded with soft sunlight through the treetops. Here they began a new beginning, the construction of a hut, which became a symbol of their life together and hope. Every step was filled with meaning. He carried heavy logs, her hands skillfully wove a sturdy frame out of branches and grass. Together they created something more than just a shelter, a house where their story could grow. Their work brought them closer, strengthening trust and creating an invisible thread of unity. Through sweat and fatigue, quiet smiles broke through, glances full of mutual respect and support. In the silence of the forest, under the rustle of leaves, they worked shoulder to shoulder, each putting a piece of themselves into this small oasis of safety. The construction of the hut became more than a physical matter for them, it was an act of faith in the future that they were building together. In every nail nailed, in every plank laid, the strength of their union, hope and determination could be felt not to give up in the face of challenges. The forest welcomed them like an old friend, protecting them and giving them strength. Here, in the midst of nature, they found not only shelter, but also peace, the first real home built on mutual understanding and love, ready to be the beginning of a new life. As the last rays of the sun slowly sank below the horizon, the forest was enveloped in a soft golden light, as if nature itself was blessing their new path. Their eyes reflected calmness and confidence, the feeling that together they were capable of going through any storms, no matter what trials fate might bring. The house, built with their own hands, stood firmly and securely, not just from logs and branches, but from their common labor, mutual support and the desire to start life anew. In this quiet corner of nature, a new story has been born, full of hope, love and strength. The past, with its pain and loss, seemed far away now, like a shadow receding before the light of a new dawn. A sense of rebirth settled in their hearts, and with every breath they took, they felt their bond strengthen, their faith in the future they would build together grow. The forest around them had a life of its own, the wind played in the treetops, and the birds sang their evening songs softly, creating a harmony that seemed to be the answer to their silent vow to be close and not let go of each other. In this calmness, hope was born, pure, strong, and unshakable. This was the end of a chapter of their journey, but a new one began, the story of two souls who found a home, strength and meaning in each other, ready to face the world shoulder to shoulder. The morning light gently penetrated through the small cracks in the wooden walls, filling the hut with a warm golden glow. She woke up first, feeling the simple but reliable fabric of the sheet under her fingers, a symbol of a new beginning. His breathing, steady and calm, sounded close by, reminding them that they were no longer alone. The outside world, with its noise and worries, remained far away, but here, inside this modest building, silence reigned, which did not oppress, but enveloped with warmth and confidence. Together they celebrated the sunrises, sharing morning rituals, collecting firewood for the fire, cooking simple food from the gifts of the forest and the earth, fixing the roofs so that the rain would not penetrate inside. During the day, she sewed new clothes, his hands helped strengthen the walls, and from time to time their gazes crossed in quiet agreement. There was no need for words in these small matters, everything was said silently, in the rhythm of teamwork and quiet caring. They spent their evenings around the campfire, the small fire danced and cast shadows on their faces, but there was no fear or loneliness in these shadows. There was a sense of belonging, strong and calm, like the ground under my feet. They sat side by side, not demanding words from each other, but understanding each other more deeply than ever before. This was their new reality, simple, but filled with meaning and hope. In every breath, in every movement, they found the peace and strength that true unity gives. As the days passed, a special understanding developed between them, which did not need big words or empty promises. Their bond grew deeper and stronger, expressed not in words, but in simple glances, light touches, and subtle gestures. It was a tacit agreement based on trust and respect that filled their lives with quiet harmony. He watched her hands deftly picking through the threads and needles, and she watched his gaze, full of calmness and strength. Each exchange of glances was a conversation without words, a promise of support and protection, expressed only by the power of their presence next to each other. As the sun slowly sank below the horizon, casting long shadows over their small house, they sat side by side, letting the silence speak for them. There was concern in their gestures, a gentle touch on the shoulder, a light wave of the hand helping to get up, a look full of understanding. Their love was quiet but strong, needing no proof or solemn vows. It was a mutual acceptance of who they had become together, and of the path they still had to walk hand in hand. In this calmness, a new force was born, which gave them confidence in the future and a reliable foundation for the future. Their new home stood among wild trees, simple and sturdy, as if it had grown out of the ground itself to become their refuge and stronghold. It was a place where she no longer came to ask for shelter, now it was her home, her own fortress, built by their joint hands and filled with their lives. Every plank, every chipped wood, every smell of fresh hay and burning wood said that this was her place where she could be herself, free and strong. This house did not just protect them from the wind and rain, it symbolized their new stage, a new life, where the past was left behind, and the future promised hope and security. For him, this house was also something more than just a haven. It was their common fortress, the place where his heart finally found peace. Here, far from his old fears and loneliness, he found what he had been looking for a long time, closeness and trust, support in a home that chose him every morning. The house stood not only on the ground, it stood on their mutual respect and strength, on the promise to be there no matter what. His silence and simplicity had their own power, the power of those two souls who were now walking through life together, sharing both joys and difficulties. He was no longer a lonely leader who carried the weight of the tribe in loneliness. His heart, which had been closed and guarded for a long time, now belonged to her, the woman who had come into his life, changing everything with her presence. This choice, to take her by his side, to share every day with her, became his new essence, repeating itself with every sunrise. A quiet peace settled inside him, as if a long-tired traveler had finally found a place to rest and regain strength. In the joy of a new beginning, there were no big words and promises, only the confidence that together they would be able to pass any tests. His eyes reflected the same hope that burned in her heart, the hope for a future made of trust and mutual respect. He stopped being lonely, now he had her, and that was the most important thing. Every day they lived together filled him with meaning and the meaning of their common journey, which was just beginning. This simple choice to live together was their true strength, their home and their future. The house built by their hands was filled not only with boards and branches, but also with quiet love that warmed every corner. In this solitude, far from the worries and fuss, there was an atmosphere of security, as if the earth itself gave them protection and peace. Each dawn brought with it the light of hope, and the evening brought the comfort of a warm fire that brought them together. Reciprocity and respect are tightly intertwined in their lives, creating a strong knot that is not subject to the winds of change. There was no place for fears here, just the presence of each other and the feeling that there were many days ahead, filled with meaning, care and understanding. It was their own story, quiet and strong, like the nature around them. In this house, they found not only a roof over their heads, but also what they call the house of the heart, a place where you can be yourself and know that you are accepted for who you are. And ahead, the road opened up, illuminated by their joint light, where they walked hand in hand, ready to face any challenge and joy that life had in store for them. Thank you for being with me in this story. If it touched your heart, please like it, share it in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. See you soon.